I first moved into Lakehurst Towers on a chilly autumn afternoon, enchanted by the building's stately brick facade and tree-lined walkway. My new condo was on the 5th floor, overlooking a small lake that sparkled under the mid-afternoon sun. As I hauled boxes up the elevator, I couldn't help feeling optimistic. Fresh walls, new neighbors, and hopefully a calm environment. Shortly after settling in, I encountered the woman who seemed to rule over everything in the building. Marjorie Bennett, better known among residents, though never to her face, as Karen. She appeared in the hallway one evening wearing a tailored blazer, clutching a clipboard. Her voice had a forced cheeriness that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Hello," she said crisply. "You must be the new owner in 5B. I'm Marjorie Bennett, the HOA chair. Welcome to Lakehurst Towers. I trust you received the guidelines packet." I smiled politely. "Yes, it's quite thorough." She gave a tight nod. "Excellent. We pride ourselves on maintaining top standards. If you have any questions, you may contact me directly. My number's in the directory." That night, neighbors whispered to me that Ms. Bennett was notorious for meddling in everyone's affairs. "She'll check your balcony for unapproved plants, your hallway decor for unauthorized rugs, everything," joked one resident. I shrugged, half amused, half wary. I never imagined that soon her behavior would escalate far beyond petty inspections, leading to a bizarre scenario involving a supposed fumigation, a deserted building, and my decision to stay behind and see the truth for myself. A few months later, the building bustled with the usual routine of daily comings and goings. Kids hopped off the school bus, couples strolled in from grocery runs, seniors gathered in the lounge for card games. Meanwhile, Ms. Bennett, Karen, maintained her usual presence, sending out memos about parking violations or scolding neighbors who place holiday wreaths too early. Then, out of the blue, an email arrived from the HOA's official account. The subject line read, "Urgent. Mandatory building fumigation. Must vacate." My heart skipped a beat when I saw the words. The message, signed by Ms. Bennett, stated, "Dear residents, this is an urgent notice that Lakehurst Towers will be undergoing a full building fumigation for pest control. The extermination company has warned us of highly toxic chemicals being used to eradicate a severe infestation in our walls. All residents must vacate the premises on Saturday from 8 a.m. until 10 p.m. for your own safety. Failure to comply could pose grave health risks and violate HOA policy. We apologize for the inconvenience and appreciate your cooperation in leaving your units during this time frame. More details forthcoming. Sincerely, Marjorie Bennett, HOA chair." I reread the email, alarmed. If it was true, we definitely had to leave. But the notice was suspiciously last minute, only a few days prior to the alleged fumigation. Typically, for major pest control treatments, a professional company or the property manager would issue formal letters well in advance. Also, the building didn't appear to have any widespread insect or rodent problem. Why so sudden and dire? Some neighbors panicked, worried about where they'd go for an entire Saturday. Others complained that Ms. Bennett must have known earlier and was only telling us now. I tried to glean details from the property manager, but he was strangely elusive, saying Ms. Bennett was handling it. My gut told me something was off. Although many neighbors started making plans to stay with relatives or book a hotel, I dug deeper. I asked a few friends in the pest control industry about the typical procedure for building-wide fumigation. Each one said the same thing. You'd see a big tinting process, a formal announcement from the extermination company, clear instructions about food removal, and so on. Also, the times typically spanned multiple days, not just one. Confused, I checked the building's official bulletin board in the lobby. No mention of any extermination company or official contract. Just Ms. Bennett's short-typed notice pinned to the corkboard. That's when rumors began circulating that Ms. Bennett had booked the rooftop lounge for a private gathering on Saturday evening. According to a neighbor who overheard Ms. Bennett on the phone, she had high-profile, out-of-town guests attending some sort of exclusive event. Could it be that she wanted the entire building vacated for her personal convenience? It sounded wild, but the more I thought about it, the more plausible it became. Ms. Bennett adored controlling the environment. If she had something special planned, Maybe she saw an empty building as the perfect solution. The notion was audacious. Pretending there was a toxic fumigation just to chase everyone out? That was the stuff of soap operas. Yet Ms. Bennett had a history of dramatic, over-the-top edicts. This might be her boldest move yet. By midweek, the neighborhood chat was abuzz. Some residents started packing suitcases. A few tried contacting Ms. Bennett for details, like whether they should seal their pantries or remove pets. She responded vaguely, insisting everything had to be removed from the building, no exceptions. One resident with a newborn baby was particularly anxious about the alleged chemical exposure. The property manager, Mr. Jenkins, was oddly silent. He'd always been approachable, but now he seemed to deflect inquiries, perhaps intimidated by Ms. Bennett's authority as HOA chair. Meanwhile, I pressed him discreetly. Is there an official fumigation contract on file? He only mumbled something about Ms. Bennett handling everything. Determined to confirm my suspicions, I started preparing. I told neighbors I might not leave, that something felt fishy. Some of them looked at me as if I were reckless. What if the chemicals are real? They asked. But I'd do a final check that morning, and if no legitimate exterminators arrived, I planned to stay put. If Ms. Bennett was scamming us, I wanted proof. A friend of mine who worked in local journalism gave me a tip. If I truly suspected a hoax, I could set up a few cameras, one facing the main entrance, another in the hallway near the elevators. That way, if no fumigation team showed up, I have time-stamped video evidence. So I purchased a couple of small, motion-activated cameras, the kind you can stick to surfaces with adhesive strips. On Friday night, I quietly placed one camera hidden near a potted plant in the lobby, angled toward the front doors. Another I set up on my own floor, discreetly attached to a corner behind a decorative sconce. They were battery-powered, with enough juice to last a day. Then, I told a few trusted neighbors that I'd remain in my unit just to see what happened. Many of them had already left or were planning to leave early, worried about toxic fumes. I felt bad they might be inconvenienced, but Ms. Bennett's track record indicated there was no real infestation, just a possible con. If I was right, I wanted to expose her. Early the next morning, Saturday, the day of the supposed fumigation, people lugged suitcases out to their cars. Pets meowed or barked in carriers. The hallways echoed with the bustle of folks vacating. Ms. Bennett herself stood near the elevator, wearing a faux concerned expression, urging everyone to please clear the building for your own safety. She had a clipboard in hand, seeming to keep track of who left. I lingered behind, half hidden around a corner, watching her. Occasionally, she'd glance down the hallway, presumably checking if any stragglers might be resisting. When she spotted me, I gave a small wave and said I'd be leaving soon. She nodded curtly, then bustled off toward the stairwell. As the clock approached 8 a.m., her designated start time, I heard front doors slamming, the parking lot abuzz with cars pulling out. By 8:30, the building felt eerily quiet. I peered outside. No sign of any large extermination truck or workers in hazmat suits. My cameras were rolling, capturing the empty lobby. Even the doorman, who normally worked weekends, had apparently been told to go home for his own safety. Cautiously, I retreated to my condo, locked the door, and settled in. If Ms. Bennett was staging a private event, what time would her guests arrive? In the meantime, I scanned local pest control websites, verifying that no one had a scheduled job at Lakehurst Towers. They all said the same. We have no record of a fumigation there. My suspicion soared. By mid-morning, the building was virtually deserted. I stepped into the hallway. No chemical smell, no sign of tarps or ventilation fans, just silence. Gingerly, I made my way down to the lobby to retrieve my hidden camera. Sure enough, the tape had recorded hours of inactivity. Not a single contractor or exterminator had entered. In fact, Ms. Bennett herself had not left the building. The camera captured her sweeping the lobby floor around 8:45 a.m., then checking her phone repeatedly. She seemed nervous, glancing at her watch, presumably waiting for some moment to arrive. I moved to the second camera on my floor. The footage showed Ms. Bennett stepping off the elevator around 9:15, heading toward the corner, then returning soon after. Possibly she was verifying that everyone had cleared out. No mention of fumigation crews or any sign of them. This was growing more suspicious by the minute. I texted a few neighbors who'd evacuated. They responded with confusion. No exterminators yet? That's weird. We're stuck at a relative's place. Others said they were sitting in coffee shops, anxiously waiting for Ms. Bennett's promised 10 p.m., all clear. I seethed, imagining how many residents had upended their weekends for no reason. Ms. Bennett's hoax was elaborate and cruel. Around noon, my hidden camera in the lobby captured a new development. Elegantly dressed people trickling in, some carrying covered dishes or gift bags. They seemed to greet Ms. Bennett with hugs or handshakes. Her face lit up with delight, no longer feigning worry about any toxic chemicals. So this was it, the private event rumored to be happening. She must have told her special invitees, "Don't worry about the fumigation. Just come on in." Intrigued, I tiptoed down the hallway to see if I could catch a glimpse in person. Sure enough, the guests were heading to the rooftop lounge, which Ms. Bennett had apparently reserved. She accompanied them, smiling broadly, guiding them through the deserted building. The guests' laughter echoed. Some held champagne bottles. Others carried fancy table centerpieces. This had all the hallmarks of a party. No sign of exterminators, no protective suits, no suspicious gear. The building that was supposedly full of lethal fumes was instead hosting Ms. Bennett's private gathering. My blood boiled at her audacity. People's entire Saturdays had been ruined so she could prance around with her out-of-town friends, enjoying an empty, quiet building. But I had a plan. I'd keep documenting everything. Armed with my phone's camera, I ascended the stairwell to the rooftop lounge level, which was typically open to all residents unless someone reserved it. The door, however, was locked from the inside, a violation of normal HOA policy, which mandated the space remain accessible in an emergency. Through a small window in the door, I saw an array of tables draped in linen, floral centerpieces, and trays of appetizers. Guests mingled, sipping drinks. Ms. Bennett flitted among them, looking triumphant. Quietly, I filmed a short video of the scene through the window, noting the timestamp. Then, I made my way back down, checking my phone's feed from the lobby camera. More guests arrived, some joking about how convenient it was that the building was all theirs for the day. One man even asked Ms. Bennett, "Is it safe that everyone else left?" She waved him off, apparently unconcerned. It was the smoking gun, absolute proof that Ms. Bennett's fumigation story was a sham. She'd orchestrated a full-scale evacuation to have the building to herself and her private party. I felt both indignation and a surge of excitement, knowing how furious my neighbors would be when they learned the truth. As I descended a stairwell, I heard footsteps. Suddenly, Ms. Bennett herself appeared, carrying a tray of what looked like canapes. She froze, startled to see me. I managed a calm facade. "Hello, Ms. Bennett. Quite the fumigation going on, isn't it?" My tone dripped with irony. Her face tightened, but she tried to recover. "What are you still doing here? Didn't you receive the email about leaving for the day? It's hazardous to remain on the premises." I raised an eyebrow. "Funny, I haven't seen any exterminators or smelled any chemicals. Looked more like a private gathering upstairs. Care to explain?" She set her jaw, eyes flashing with anger. "That is none of your concern. You're violating the health guidelines by staying. If something happens to you, the HOA won't be responsible." I snorted softly. I have a right to be in my own home, and it's quite obvious there's no fumigation at all. Why would you lie to everyone? Her cheeks flushed. "I don't have to justify myself to you. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to tend to my guests." Without waiting for a response, she pushed past me, climbing back to the lounge. My heart hammered with adrenaline. There it was, her dismissive admission. She didn't even bother to maintain the fumigation lie. I dashed back to my unit, where I saved and backed up all the camera footage. Ms. Bennett might try to destroy evidence, but I wouldn't let her. This was going to blow up in her face. Around mid-afternoon, a few neighbors who'd left for the day began trickling back, suspicious after my text warned them that something was amiss. One by one, they stepped inside the building, expecting locked doors and chemical fumes. Instead, they found a lobby silent except for a cluster of well-dressed strangers heading upstairs. I greeted them softly, guiding them to my unit, where I showed them snippets of the recordings. Ms. Bennett's guests arriving, the rooftop party in full swing, the absolute lack of any pest control crew. Rage and betrayal flickered across their faces. Some had spent money on hotel rooms or forced to bunk with relatives for the day, all because Ms. Bennett claimed the building was unsafe. She lied to all of us just to host a private party, spat one neighbor, a teacher named Liza, who had 2 kids. I can't believe this. We decided to gather more people. Within an hour, about a dozen returned residents quietly assembled in my living room, watching the footage. Many exclaimed how Ms. Bennett's party had been planned for weeks, how she'd never mentioned any fumigation at board meetings, and how the property manager must have been strong-armed or deceived. The tension rose, with folks vowing to confront Ms. Bennett directly. By late afternoon, the group of incensed neighbors marched upstairs, determined to catch Ms. Bennett and her guests red-handed. I joined them, phone camera at the ready, though my pulse pounded at the thought of a confrontation. We found a lounge door still locked, so Liza banged on it loudly. Moments later, Ms. Bennett peeked out, her face draining of color when she saw the angry crowd. "What is this?" she hissed, stepping into the hallway. "You lied to us." Liza snapped. "We have proof there's no fumigation. You made us leave our homes so you could have your fancy party." Ms. Bennett's eyes darted nervously. Behind her, curious guests peered over shoulders, confused. One of them, apparently her out-of-town relative, asked, "Marjorie, what's happening?" Ms. Bennett glared, ordering him inside. One resident brandished their phone, playing back a snippet of the lobby camera footage. Ms. Bennett greeting her guests, welcoming them to the empty building. Another neighbor demanded an explanation for the bogus pest control notice. Ms. Bennett stuttered, trying to claim there was a last-minute cancellation. But it was too late. Everyone saw through the excuse. "You wasted our entire Saturday," shouted a father of 2 toddlers. "We paid for a motel room, thinking there were toxic chemicals." "This is fraudulent," hollered another neighbor. "We're reporting you to the board. You can't lie about emergencies to clear out the building." Ms. Bennett, cornered, attempted to salvage her dignity. "I was only acting in the best interest of the building. We had a minor pest alert. Exterminators must have been delayed. There's no need for a scene." But her shaky voice and deflecting words rang hollow. The furious neighbors were having none of it. Word spread quickly among Ms. Bennett's guests that a full-blown confrontation was erupting outside the lounge. Uncomfortable, they began filing out, some looking embarrassed. A few apologized to the residents as they departed. One woman muttered that she had no idea Ms. Bennett had orchestrated a forced evacuation just for the party. This celebration ended abruptly, with Ms. Bennett left stammering excuses to departing friends. Residents parted to let them leave, glaring or shaking their heads in disbelief. The hush that settled in the hallway afterward was tense and electric. Finally, Ms. Bennett turned to face the angry group. "Look," she snapped. "I apologize for any inconvenience. The exterminators were supposed to come. I can't control their schedule." Liza stepped forward, voice trembling with anger. "We've called multiple pest control companies. None had a job here. You lied, Marjorie. We all know it. Prepare to explain yourself to the HOA board. And don't think we won't push for serious consequences." With that, the neighbors dispersed, some heading back to their condos, others planning to gather proof and file formal complaints. Ms. Bennett stood alone in the hallway, shoulders stiff, fists clenched. Her grand scheme lay in ruins. That evening, the building buzzed with talk of Ms. Bennett's deception. Everyone was outraged that she'd used an official HOA email to trick them into leaving. Many demanded immediate action from the rest of the HOA board, which comprised a few other members who hadn't known about the fumigation. Emails flew, phone calls were made, and Ms. Bennett's ploy quickly became the building's biggest scandal in recent memory. A group of residents, led by Liza and the father who'd lost money on a motel, started drafting a petition to have Ms. Bennett removed as HOA chair for abuse of power. I compiled my camera footage and screenshots of Ms. Bennett's emails. One neighbor had an aunt who worked as a paralegal, and she suggested we keep everything documented in case Ms. Bennett tried to spin a news story. Meanwhile, the property manager, Mr. Jenkins, was nowhere to be found, likely cowering from the storm Ms. Bennett had unleashed. By Monday, the HOA board called an emergency meeting in the lounge, now open to everyone. About 30 residents showed up, seething but determined. Ms. Bennett arrived looking haggard, no longer sporting her usual confident demeanor. She took a seat with the other board members, 2 older men, a middle-aged woman, and a retired teacher. They all seemed stunned by the large, angry turnout. The retired teacher on the board, Ms. Aguilar, cleared her throat. "We're here to address allegations that Ms. Bennett misused HOA communication channels to stage a false fumigation notice, thereby inconveniencing many residents and hosting a private event under false pretenses. Ms. Bennett, do you have a statement?" Pale but defiant, Ms. Bennett rose. She stumbled through a half-hearted explanation about believing there was an urgent pest situation and that she regretted the confusion. But the board peppered her with questions. Why no official pest control company? Why no record of a contract? Why instruct the doorman to leave? Ms. Bennett had no coherent answers. Residents shouted that she'd locked the lounge for a private party, which Ms. Bennett feebly denied. Finally, Ms. Aguilar announced that the board had reviewed the evidence, videos, emails, statement from neighbors. "It's clear," she said, "that there was no scheduled fumigation. This was a deceitful act that caused undue hardship. Ms. Bennett violated HOA policy by issuing a fake emergency notice. The board will now decide on disciplinary measures." A hush fell. Ms. Bennett sank into her chair, trembling with anger and embarrassment. After a brief private discussion, the board reconvened. Ms. Aguilar read their decision. Ms. Bennett would receive a formal written warning in her file for misusing the HOA's official communication channels and staging a false emergency. She was stripped of certain administrative privileges, particularly sending building-wide emails without another board member's approval. Furthermore, if Ms. Bennett committed another major violation, the board would hold a recall vote to remove her from the HOA leadership entirely. Residents applauded, though some felt the punishment was too lenient. The father who'd paid for a motel demanded Ms. Bennett reimburse him. While the board said individual restitution wasn't under their purview, Ms. Bennett awkwardly agreed to cover that cost to make amends. The entire meeting ended with Ms. Bennett slinking away, face flushed, while neighbors angrily muttered about her nerve. In the days following the scandal, Lakehurst Towers felt both vindicated and unsettled. On the one hand, Ms. Bennett's scheme was exposed, and she was officially reprimanded. People no longer trusted her. Some joked about Karen's Kool-Aid, referencing how she manipulated everyone to leave. Others talked about running for a board seat next election, so Ms. Bennett's power would be further diluted. For her part, Ms. Bennett withdrew from the day-to-day meddling that had become her trademark. She rarely roamed the halls with her clipboard anymore. Instead, she scurried between her unit and the parking lot, avoiding eye contact. The rest of the board took a more active role in communications, ensuring Ms. Bennett couldn't do anything unilateral again. Neighbors shared relief that Ms. Bennett's deception ended without anyone hurt, just inconvenienced. Some had wasted money on hotels or left pets with sitters, but at least no real emergency had occurred. Others felt outraged that Ms. Bennett still held a board position at all. Yet the formal warning hung over her like a storm cloud, presumably keeping her in check. Curious about the property manager's silence, I arranged a meeting with Mr. Jenkins. He looked frazzled as we spoke in his small office. "I'm so sorry," he mumbled, wringing his hands. Ms. Bennett insisted it was a real fumigation. She said she'd hired a top-tier extermination company that demanded absolute privacy. But I couldn't find any official documents. When I pressed her, she threatened to have me fired for insubordination to the HOA chair. He sighed heavily. I guess I should have reported it to the rest of the board, but I was afraid. She's had this building under her thumb for years. I never anticipated she'd do something so extreme. I told him I understood, but the residents felt betrayed by the manager's lack of transparency. Jenkins bowed his head. "I know. I'm prepared to accept blame for not blowing the whistle. The board has already scolded me. I'll do better, I promise." Though I felt some sympathy for Jenkins, I also realized his inaction had enabled Ms. Bennett. At least now, he seemed genuinely remorseful, and with Ms. Bennett's authority curtailed, he might be freer to perform his duties without fear of reprisal. Perhaps that was a step toward a healthier dynamic in the building. With Ms. Bennett no longer at the helm of day-to-day communications, other board members stepped up. They held a resident town hall to hear grievances. People vented about the wasted day, the panic of thinking toxic chemicals would be unleashed, the inconvenience and cost. The board apologized sincerely, promising new protocols for official notices. From now on, any building-wide evacuation alert required proof from the relevant contractor or service provider. This open forum helped rebuild trust. Neighbors felt heard. Some demanded Ms. Bennett's immediate resignation, but the board explained that she had a formal warning and any further misconduct would trigger a recall vote. In the meantime, they urged patience and assured everyone that Ms. Bennett's power was significantly reduced. I, too, shared my story of staying behind, filming the lobby with hidden cameras and confronting Ms. Bennett. Many thanked me for shining light on the ruse, saying they might never have known otherwise. Liza, who spearheaded the complaints, proposed a more transparent system of communication, like a building newsletter or official website where board members posted verified updates. Everyone applauded the idea. Strangely, a week after the fiasco, Ms. Bennett slid a typed note under everyone's door. It read, "Residents, I regret any confusion caused by the recent fumigation notice. Due to last-minute changes from the extermination company, the treatment was canceled. I understand many of you were inconvenienced. I apologize for any distress. M. Bennett, HOA Chair." It was a half-baked apology, avoiding admission that she'd fabricated the entire scenario. Nevertheless, it indicated she felt compelled to publicly backtrack. Neighbors scoffed at her refusal to fully come clean, but at least it was something. We recognized her pride, wouldn't let her outright confess. However, the building had moved on. People resumed their daily routines without her constant intrusions. A small group began planning a social event in the rooftop lounge, this time for all residents, ironically turning the same space Ms. Bennett had once monopolized into a community gathering. The board approved it eagerly, encouraging a friendlier atmosphere. In the following months, Lakehurst Towers seemed to breathe easier. Freed from Ms. Bennett's micromanagement, the property manager Jenkins calmly addressed genuine maintenance issues, like a leaky roof corner and a glitchy elevator. The board communicated openly with residents, sending monthly email bulletins about real events and improvements. No more surprise emergencies or suspicious last-minute evacuations. Ms. Bennett largely stayed out of sight, presumably nursing her wounded ego. She still had a seat on the board, but she rarely spoke at meetings. Some speculated she might step down at the next election. Others worried she might attempt a comeback. But for now, the fiasco had tarnished her credibility. Even her longtime allies distanced themselves. With trust gradually restored, neighbors interacted more. The children from the third and fourth floors organized a weekend bake sale, raising funds for new plants in the courtyard. Seniors started a weekly book club. The rooftop lounge reopened for group yoga sessions. It felt like we were reclaiming a sense of community that Ms. Bennett's reign had stifled. One afternoon, as I was returning from grocery shopping, I found Ms. Bennett by the mailboxes, sifting through envelopes. She glanced up, caught my eye, then looked away. But this time, instead of ignoring her, I approached. "Ms. Bennett," I said calmly. "Got a minute?" She pursed her lips but nodded. I took a breath. "Look, I know we had our differences, but for what it's worth, I hope we can move on. The building is better off with a cohesive community." She sighed, a flicker of vulnerability crossing her face. "You think I enjoy being hated? I try to keep things in order here. Perhaps I took it too far." I shrugged gently. We all make mistakes. But tricking people into leaving their homes was a huge breach of trust. Her eyes tightened. "You don't know the pressure I'm under, trying to maintain property values, dealing with the board's endless demands. I wanted to host a special event for my sister's foundation. I needed a quiet space, and I let it get out of hand." I almost felt a tinge of sympathy. "Well," I said, I do hope you see why people were angry. Some had nowhere else to go, and you cost them time and money. But maybe this can be a turning point. If you truly want to be part of the community, honesty is a start. She said nothing for a moment, then gave a small nod. I suppose so. Without further words, she collected her mail and walked off. It wasn't a full apology or reconciliation, but it felt like a step towards something less adversarial. Spring blossomed in Lakehurst Towers. The board announced a community day on the rooftop lounge, open to all residents, with food, music, and activities. This time, no one was told to vacate. No false fumigation threats. The lounge filled with laughter, conversation, and potluck dishes reflecting the building's cultural diversity. I helped set up tables, recalling how Ms. Bennett's secret party had once locked everyone out. Now, ironically, we all gathered in that same space to celebrate unity. Neighbors who barely spoke before shared recipes and introduced children to new friends. The property manager, Jenkins, relaxed in a corner, sipping lemonade, relief on his face that the environment was no longer hostile. Ms. Bennett hovered at the edge of the room, seemingly unsure if she was welcome. After some hesitation, Ms. Aguilar from the board beckoned her over. Ms. Bennett joined a circle of residents discussing landscaping improvements. Slowly, conversation sparked. A couple of people regarded her warily, but with time, the tension eased. Perhaps she realized that if she wanted acceptance, she had to behave more ethically. As the months rolled on, the fake fumigation scandal became the building's infamous legend. New residents would hear about it and exclaim, "Wait, our HOA chair forced everyone out for a non-existent pest control." People shook their heads in amazement at Ms. Bennett's gall. Yet the final outcome was reassuring. The rest of the board had intervened, the neighbors had confronted her, and an official warning stood on her record. Any future attempts at manipulation would be met with immediate backlash. Ms. Bennett seemed chastened. She no longer issued abrupt or dramatic notices. The new requirement that all building-wide messages needed a second board member's approval prevented unilateral stunts. Occasionally, I rewatched the camera footage from that day. Guests arriving in fancy clothes, Ms. Bennett bustling about. It still angered me that she'd stooped so low. But it also reminded me how collectively we rose up against the deception and took back our building. The fiasco had ironically strengthened our community bonds, forging friendships in the midst of adversity. In the end, Lakehurst Towers emerged from Ms. Bennett's phony fumigation scheme with greater unity and a more transparent HOA structure. Residents no longer cowered under random emails declaring bizarre emergencies. The board functioned as it should, making decisions in the open, requiring evidence for serious announcements. The property manager, Jenkins, found the courage to push back politely whenever Ms. Bennett tried to overstep her boundaries. While Ms. Bennett remained on the board until her term expired, she was a shadow of her former domineering self. She rarely contested decisions, mindful that another major misstep would cost her the position entirely. Some neighbors forgave her. Others never did. But at least the building was no longer her personal playground. Looking around our improved, cooperative environment, I felt proud of how we'd handled the crisis. Through calm but determined resistance, documentation, and collective action. We'd proven that a single Karen couldn't bully an entire community if neighbors stood together. And that, perhaps, was the ultimate lesson. Yes, her attempt at deception backfired spectacularly. The building was never fumigated, the toxic chemicals were a sham, and Ms. Bennett faced public disgrace for her manipulative ruse. In the process, we discovered a stronger sense of camaraderie and resilience than we ever had before. If that wasn't a happy ending, watching Ms. Bennett meekly attend our real community events, while the rest of us enjoyed our home without fear, then I don't know what is.